Good morning. I'm Mark Blank, and this is the Commissioners' Weekly Meeting for March 13th, 2024. Commissioner Plant, any preliminary matters? Are you ready to approve the consent agenda as presented?
I would vote to approve the consent agenda.
Can you hear him, Commissioner Gilman? I'm having issues.
No problem.
Commissioner Gilman, you ready to approve the consent agenda?
I am.
Okay, as am I. I'm going to log on my phone. While we do that, let's go with proceeding number 22A-0315 EG, Public Service Company. Ms. Harper, Mr. Davis.
Recording in progress.
I can't hear Ron.
I can't hear Ron either. Let's see. Ron,
can you hear me?
Yeah. Ron, try again. Nothing from Ron.
Just so everyone knows, I can hear all three of the commissioners, but not Ron either. So it's not just you.
Okay. So no one can hear Ron, and Eric, the chairman, has a speaker problem.
Chairman Blank, can you hear me? No, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
By God, we'll get this right eventually.
Why don't we jump to the next issue, proceeding number 23A-0242E. Let's take that one last, actually. Let's jump to proceeding 22R-0491 GPS. Ms. McLaughlin, Ms. Hensley.
Sounds good. And can you hear me? Just to be sure. All right, awesome. We're off. So Erin McLaughlin, Commission Counsel. Commissioners, today for your consideration is rehearing, re-argument, or reconsideration on narrow requests regarding the Commission's continued improvements to its gas pipeline safety rules. In this proceeding, the Commission is updating its GPS rules to include further reporting requirements, mapping information, and doubling the Commission's fining calculations applicable to regulated operators. In addition, the Commission directed ongoing stakeholder processes for further improvements to the Commission's rules and processes, in particular with regard to advanced leak detection. Before you today are two overlapping requests for limited RRR following the Commission's robust decision on exceptions that issued last month. In these narrow requests, Public Service and Colorado Springs Utility each argue that the volumetric leak reporting is difficult, if not impossible, in most instances. Operators argue that their current systems are not able to calculate with accuracy when a leak may have started or the leak rate. Operators request that the Commission not adopt rules requiring leak volume reporting because of the difficulties in accurately determining the volume of gas leaks from the pipelines. In addition, Public Service and Colorado Springs Utility both point to rules that note environmental and possible emissions impacts could be implicated from gas pipeline leaks. Both argue that environmental and emission goals and ramifications are not the focus of the gas pipeline safety rules here, and Public Service claims that it is unclear how the estimate of leak gas volume and greenhouse gas emissions interact, and claims that the reporting and information gathered here in these rules could potentially conflict with the Commission's clean heat rules, or possibly data collected and used by the Air Pollution Control Division and Energy and Carbon Management Commissions, which are sister agencies with aligned state emissions reductions goals. The rules here indicate that the Commission would share reported information with its sister agencies and federal counterparts. Operators argue that the rules regarding leak volume estimates and providing known emissions or other reporting, including to inform sister agencies given their collective interests in state emissions and other goals, should be deleted. I'm prepared to provide a recommendation unless there are questions on the filings.
No, I think we'd welcome a recommendation.
Certainly. Commissioners, while advisors and counsel understand the operator's concerns that specific volumes of leaks in some circumstances may not be fully known and estimates may be just that, estimates, we further agree that aspects of state regulation, including the Commission's own clean heat rules and sister agency regulations at the Air Pollution Control Division and ECMC, appropriately and directly address and guide the state towards its emission reduction goals. Nevertheless, we disagree with the filings that in recognizing these realities, the Commission should remove the reporting requirements altogether or otherwise not cooperate in sharing potentially pertinent information with appropriate state and federal counterparts. Therefore, we recommend the order here clarify the need for volume reporting of leaks, but also allow operators discretion to include information and supportive reasoning regarding any estimated calculations or if accurate estimates were unable to be made. We also recommend that rather than striking the rules, the Commission acknowledge that other state rules and agencies certainly address directly emissions reductions considerations, and that while reporting leak information may be provided to sister agencies with tangential jurisdiction to ensure pipeline safety and emission considerations, and additional information could be requested, the appropriate agency processes and further review would of course be needed. The rules here do not indicate otherwise and in no way attempt to circumvent important state regulations regarding emission requirements by this Commission and its counterparts. The Commission's order can emphasize that in addressing these concerns, the improved reporting rules remain clear in their effort to further bolster collecting robust and transparent information for gas pipeline safety regulation, and that the Commission will continue that effort, including in ongoing and future rulemakings. So with that, and consistent with that discussion, I recommend the Commissioners grant in part these exceptions to acknowledge what I've just discussed, but deny the request to strike the reporting requirements altogether.
Commissioner Plant, questions, comments, discussion, or a vote?
Yeah, I would agree with the recommendation.
Commissioner Goodman?
I also agree with the recommendation.
As do I, and that can be an ABC decision, granting in part and denying in part the RRR request. So thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. Thank you, Ms. Hensley. Mr. Davis, take two. Let's try again. I still can't hear Mr. Davis. Can you guys? All right, let's go to the tap and we'll come back with Mr. Davis at the end. And Mr. Davis, you may just try calling in here with your cell phone. That's what I had to do. Mr. Greenberg, Public Service Company of Colorado, tap, take two.
Yes, good morning, Commissioners. Dan Greenberg of your advisory staff. At your initial deliberation on this case on February 28th, you agreed not to adopt either the settlement or the stipulation budget proposed in this proceeding, finding faults with both of those approaches. Instead, you chose to find a middle path, and the majority of your deliberations that day considered policy choices, such as whether the company should be allowed to own behind-the-meter assets, whether equity rebates should be extended to non-income qualified residents of disproportionately impacted communities, and whether the Charging Perks program should offer a greater incentive to participants than the Optimize Your Charge program. Each of these policy decisions has budget ramifications, and advisors subsequently developed and circulated to each of you a revised budget estimating the impacts of each decision. In doing so, we discovered additional questions that were not addressed on February 28th, and so today we will facilitate your deliberation on each of the remaining decision points. I'll go through a number of budget items with you, and following that, I'll turn the discussion over to Mike Mendelson, who will guide you through a few remaining points. Unless any of you have initial comments, I'll proceed to the first decision point.
That'd be good.
All right. So the first decision point regards equity rebates in the clean vehicles portfolio. In the first deliberation, you decided to extend equity rebates for income qualified customers or IQ customers, but not to expand equity rebates for non-IQ residents of disproportionately impacted communities or tribal communities. So the first decision point today is whether the full budget for equity rebates should be retained, reduced by some degree to account for the exclusion of non-IQ participation, or just to direct the company to provide a revised budget, assuming exclusion of non-IQ participation.
And just so I'm clear, Mr. Greenberg, this is roughly a $1.3 million issue either way.
That is correct. Well, that's how I put it in the revised budget. What my kind of rough cut was to reduce the budget by 25%, just as a rough guess. But since there's no information on the record about participation of the non-IQ residents in DICs, I wasn't able to be any more precise than that.
I'd probably leave it in, but Commissioner Plant, what are you thinking?
Well, I mean, I think I was the dissenting vote on this, so however you guys want to do it.
Commissioner, go in.
I mean, it stands to reason that the pool of customers we'd expect to serve with rebates is smaller. As Mr. Greenberg points out, there doesn't appear to be any sort of precise information in the record for us to understand the degree to which the company anticipated, what part of the budget was serving the non-IQ participants. So I can go either approach. I think Mr. Greenberg had indicated he'd looked at a cut with 25% less, which I think is a pretty conservative reduction, given the potential increase in folks who could have used it under the previous. Or we can leave it and see if it fills. To my understanding, it wouldn't be assessed to customers unless it's filled, but would then factor into some of the flexibility and overall budget abilities if we do give them a full budget on this. So I don't know, Chairman, your final persuasion on this?
I'm good either way too. You want to just leave it and see if they use it?
I think that's fine. So we'll leave the overall budget and kind of acknowledge that does give some more flexibility and room, since we had proposed cuts in several other areas.
Any other comments, Commissioner Plant?
No, I'd agree with that.
Very good.
Carry on, Mr. Greenberg.
All right, the next deliberation point regards the charger and wiring rebate program in the residential portfolio. In the first deliberation, you decided to eliminate company ownership of behind-the-meter assets, both residential and commercial. This eliminates the EV Accelerated Home program and its budget, with the exception of the bidirectional charging demonstration program. Again, that was kind of a demo program to test out bidirectional charging with an optional add-on stationary battery. In the first deliberation, you agreed to the proposed rebate levels of $500 for non-IQ participants and $2,300 for IQ participants, subject to the limitation that the rebate could not exceed the cost of the project. For resolution today is whether to approve the $800 rebate proposed for non-IQ DIC or tribal residents proposed in the settlement, and if so, whether to specify a budget for these participants or direct the company to specify the budget in its compliance filing.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I'd vote to approve.
Commissioner Gilman?
I agree.
As do I.
Okay, so we're going to include the $800 rebate for the non-IQ DIC residents. Is that right?
Why don't you give a recommendation? on that one, Mr. Greenberg, and just make sure we're all on the
right.
same page?
Well, my recommendation had been to reject it for the same reasons the commission rejected non-IQ vehicle rebates, that being primarily that there are residents in DICs that have income, far above levels that would qualify them as income qualified.
So I guess, Commissioner Planner, are you okay with that recommendation, or would you like to do something different?
I would still vote to support the rebates in the DIC community, but I think that was my position on the other one as well, and you guys were in the opposite side. So,
Commissioner Gilman.
Yeah, I mean, here I think we're talking about a lower cost rebate, and perhaps can glean some intelligence for how this is used in DI communities outside of just the IQ crowd. So I would support Commissioner Plante's direction.
All right, so I think I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, you should let me vote too. I would support my colleagues as well. So I guess we're not following your recommendation.
Yeah, and I apologize for jumping the gun on that. All right, and so
Mr. Greenberg, nobody's getting style points this morning, so no worries.
I'll work on that. Okay, so I think then in terms of a budget for that, should we just direct the company to utilize the budget that they proposed for this program and set aside some portion of that for the for that $800 rebate for that group of participants?
And the number I have is no more than 2.4 million. Is that right?
Well, that was for that 2.4 million was the full budget for the EV Accelerated Home program. So the proposal was to shift that to the charger and wiring rebate.
Does that work for you, Commissioner Plant? Commissioner Gilman?
Yes.
All right.
Me too. So there you go.
All right. Then we're going to move on to the commercial portfolio. In the first deliberation, you decided that the company would not be allowed, again, to own any behind-the-meter EVSI or EVSE, but that these assets would be eligible for rebates. During the first deliberation, you discussed adopting the 50% rebate levels as recommended by staff, which are specific dollar amounts per rebate. But later in the deliberation referred to the rebates, excuse me, as covering 50% of total project costs, suggesting that the rebates would be customized to each project. The 50% rebates proposed by staff are $5,835 a port for level 2 EVSI and $18,250 a port, excuse me, for DCFC based on 50% of company cost estimates. Staff proposed that these be doubled, covering full or approximation of full costs for multifamily housing in disproportionately impacted communities. Advisors have identified a number of inconsistencies between settlement text describing rebates in the commercial portfolio, the budget submitted with the settlement, and values found in other company worksheets. But what's clear is that the settlement budget includes a budget of over $117 million for company-owned commercial EVSI, $39 million for EVSI rebates, so a total of $156 million for EVSI in the settlement budget, and then $6.1 million for company-owned EVSE, and another $1.95 million for commercial EVSE rebates, for a total of just over $8 million for the EVSE. So there are two decision points on the commercial budget. The first is, what overall budget level do you want to adopt for the all rebate EVSI and EVSE program? Note that in the revised budget estimate I sent you following the first deliberations, I cut the company-owned budgets in half and added the proposed EVSE and EVSI rebates from the settlement. So the question is, what overall budget level do you want to adopt for this program?
And why don't you throw out a recommendation and we'll take it from there.
So my recommendation here is, since we're shifting from fully company-owned, 100% subsidized equipment, both chargers and EVSI, to a program that provides rebates that are 50% for non-IQ participants and perhaps 100% for multifamily housing in DICs. I guess my proposal is to cut those budgets in half. The budgets for company-owned equipment in half, and add that into the amounts the settlement puts aside for rebates. And that results in the numbers you see in the budget, revised budget I sent you.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah,
In response.
I'd agree with the recommendation. So if I understand correctly, is the rebate amount staying the same, or is the rebate amount getting higher? I know we're talking about making the overall budget 50% of the company, but are we increasing the rebate, or is the rebate the same?
I think the rebate levels, I believe, are proposed to be about 30% of project cost. Again, this would be for non-IQ participants.
As I recall, Commissioner Gilman, if I recall your proposal, it was to increase the rebate amounts to 50% from 30%. But I might have that wrong. I don't know if you recall what your proposal was on that.
Commissioner Gilman?
I missed just a little because my internet was not doing great right there. Commissioner,
Yeah, so I was trying to
can you give me the
remember.
punchline?
I was trying to remember what your recommendation. I think that you made the motion, and my understanding of your recommendation was to increase the rebate amount from 30% to 50%. And what we're talking about here is the overall budget. But I wanted to get clarification. Were we increasing the individual rebates from 30% to 50%, or leaving them at 30%?
I mean, I'd suggest we do. That feels right to me. I mean, right now we have a mix in the proposal of this fully paid option or the 30% subsidized rebate option. If we're moving to a full rebate option, it seems clear to me we would in some way cut the difference to provide a bit richer of a rebate kind of across the entire spectrum, especially considering there now is no totally free option, totally covered option. So yeah, my thought was that, and correct me if I'm way off base, Mr. Greenberg, but that what was a 30% rebate would now go up to a 50% rebate. But that's the option. That's what's available. And there's just way more of those rebates.
That's what I thought we voted on. And how does that impact the overall budget question that we're discussing here?
I think that's what Mr. Greenberg's tried to simulate in the spreadsheet he proposed, where, right now, if the company's paying for 100%, he cut the 117 million that they used for their budget in half, because we're doing a rebate worth half, not worth 100%, and then just tacked on the amount that was for the rebate program. Probably the only caveat adjustment there is, like, now that rebate program will go from 30% to 50%. So it's possible you need a little more money for that, but it's also possible you do see a little less uptake because something is not completely free now. So, I mean, I think, it gets us just shy of 100 million. It seems to me 100 million might be the place to land, given all of those factors.
That works for me, Commissioner Plant.
Yep, I agree.
Okay.
Does that give you what you need, Mr. Greenberg?
It does, yes, thank you. the second decision point on this, and just want to clarify again, because we got a little confused last time around, that the incentive levels, as I discussed before, that I believe you've agreed to are the levels recommended by staff, which are the company's estimates of 50% of the cost of the EVSI and 50% of the cost of the EVSE, rather than 50% of the individual project costs, which could vary tremendously from one project to another. So I guess what I'm recommending here or asking is, do you want to base those rebates on the levels recommended by staff? And again, those are based on the company's estimates of the average cost. Or do you want to base the rebates on percent of individual project cost? And I would add that none of the parties are recommending that second option.
Yeah, I mean, I think projected cost is, you don't want to have it on every, I think that could push for, inflated costs. But I think just a set rebate based on estimated 50% of estimated costs.
Yeah, average cost as staff. You okay with that, Commissioner Gellman?
Yeah, I'd support the static approach.
As do I.
Thank you. The next issue concerns a $14.4 million O&M line item in the commercial portfolio budget for infrastructure maintenance. Since the commission has rejected company ownership of behind-the-meter assets, this budget item would seem to be unnecessary, as maintenance will be the responsibility of customers rather than the company. This issue was not addressed during the first deliberation. So for decision is whether or not to eliminate this cost category from the final budget for this TEP.
It seems to me like it should be eliminated, and if we're reading it wrong, we'll know on RRR, but Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Commissioner Gellman?
Also agree.
All right, moving right along. Next issue regards the definition of EVSI and whether or not to require the company to file an advice letter to amend that definition to include civil design work. There was some discussion of this in the first deliberation, but you decided to bring it back for deliberation today. I'd like to clarify that given the commission's decisions at the first deliberation to disallow utility ownership of behind-the-meter assets, this point is moot because tariff provisions regarding the EVSI definition are now irrelevant. Advisors therefore recommend that the commission not require the company to file an advice letter to modify that definition of EVSI. But I'll turn it over to you for your deliberations.
Makes sense to me. Commissioner Plant?
I agree.
Commissioner Gellman?
Also agree.
All right.
Mr. Greenberg?
The next issue concerns funding for electric school buses under the innovation portfolio. At the first deliberation, commissioners discussed requiring that participants apply for federal matching grants to receive rebates through this program. Commissioner Plant suggested that the program require a 50-50 federal match. Chair Blank and Commissioner Gillman were supportive of that idea. Another idea Chair Blank expressed was to allow some portion of the budget to be used without matching federal money. There was agreement that this issue required more refining at deliberation, at this deliberation. The revised budget estimate delivered with this prior to this meeting retains the $15.9 million school bus budget. First decision point here is whether to specify a specific federal matching grant requirement or to direct the company to work with relevant stakeholders to refine the process as a matching grant program and to propose this change via the 60-day process.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think we should put a required percentage in there, because if the federal government program, says that they'll match up to 30%, all of a sudden we couldn't participate. So I think it would be smart for us to, just say that this money should be used to leverage federal matching funds, not specific percentages. But I think one of the other issues that Mr. Greenberg is getting to is, do we want to have a base budget that's separate from the grant component, and then have another, another balance that would go into the grant component. What do you guys think about that?
And any thoughts on the stakeholder group? Should we just turn this over to a stakeholder group and let them come back to us after 60 days with that guidance?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I know that
Commissioner
the
Gilman?
fourth, so the overall EPA program, I think, was $5 billion. They've done 3 grant issuances already. I think they've got a 4th one coming up, but this is an ongoing grant program. So, but I don't know what the next round of grants requirements will be. And I think a stakeholder group would be able to work within that context.
Commissioner Gilman?
Yeah, I think that broadly works. I mean, I think especially if you look kind of intelligently at what we should be kind of expending per bus, assuming there is some matching here to really incentivize school districts to go after as much matching as is possible, which I would think they'd be doing anyway, but a good reason for us to not over incentivize, like we want the balance to be made up by some of these matching grants and things like that. And then I'd really love them to consider setting aside a portion of the budget. You know, I don't know if it's between $500,000, $1 million to really be able to provide advisory services to school districts. I feel like this is, this is not their main wheelhouse. This is not something they're really familiar with. And I think the utilities help to the school district can be very valuable as part of this process to even figure out where would they put the charging, what would their bills be with the charging. All of these questions are going to be pretty foreign to school districts looking into this, and I think this is a place where those advisory services could be really well targeted to really help these school districts be able to take advantage or say get some of the technical information they might need for a DOE grant together. So I just think I'd really love to see them setting aside a decent amount of money to be as helpful to those school districts as possible, either in the grant process or in the actual kind of siting and procurement choices that are just going to be outside of the norm for the school districts to figure out. So I would add that to maybe the stakeholder, a strong preference that we see a set aside for really strong advisory services here to assist them.
So Commissioner Plant, you okay with adding language to the order requesting the stakeholder group provide some funding and advisory service support to the school district consistent with Commissioner Gilman's request? I am.
Yes, I agree.
Mr. Greenberg, does that give you what you need?
Yeah, just to be clear, it sounds like you want to leave it up to the stakeholder group to decide the amount to be set aside for advisory services. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, in the $500,000 to $1 million range,
Okay.
roughly. We'd be open to them suggesting something different, but that's our guidance, is the way I'd say it.
Okay. I also wanted to point out that, or ask whether you are interested in asking the advisory group or the stakeholder group to set aside any money for other purposes such as V2X or grid resilience demonstrations or projects.
Oh, I like that. Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I think, they can, would we have them come to us with a proposal? Is that basically it, or would we pick a number here?
Yeah, my recommendation would be that you would direct the company, work with stakeholders, and then propose something through the 60-day process.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with that.
Commissioner Gilman?
Yeah, I think they could provide some real value here. Obviously, I think V2X as well as, potentially looking at resilience hub benefits or things like that are some really unique features of the school bus application. If they find it's not ready, there's nothing they can reasonably invest in this cycle to advance that. I'd hate to see the budget kind of taken by something that doesn't exist or isn't ready. So I think it would be helpful to have the stakeholder group address that, to the extent it's available and possible. Some of that demonstration could be very valuable.
All right. Does that give you what you need, Mr. Greenberg?
It does, thank you. The next issue regards the advisory services budget. At the first deliberation, commissioners agreed not to make decisions regarding this budget, but to revisit it at this deliberation. In the revised budget estimate circulated to you following the first deliberation, the advisory services budget declines from 16.4 million to 15.4 million based on scaling most of the components to capital reductions in the other portfolios, but holding the community advisory and workforce training budget constant. The decision point here is whether to keep the advisory services budget as proposed by the settlement, adjust as demonstrated in the revised budget estimate, or to make other adjustments.
Commissioner Plant?
I'd just be inclined to go with the settlement.
Commissioner Gilman?
I would be more inclined to scale it with the size of the programs, just given if the programs are of a different size, it seems more appropriate to track program size. Like based on the settlement, but then scale it based on the program size that we determined. So, happy
Is
to
there a percentage?
just
Well,
look.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Mr. Greenberg.
So the reduction from based on your decisions in the first deliberation, we reduced capital spend in several of the portfolios, and so based on those reductions, I scaled the advisory services budgets for each portfolio line item according to those reductions in the capital. And that reduced it by about $1 million from 16.4 to 15.4 million.
Yeah, I think I'm probably with Commissioner Gilman on this one, Commissioner Plant.
Yeah,
So,
I'd agree with that. I think that makes sense.
Mr. Greenberg?
All righty. The next issue regards portfolio level O&M and plan administration O&M costs and how these should be adjusted in light of other budget adjustments. During the first deliberation, you discussed possibly setting administration costs at a percentage of the overall spend, such as 15%, which Chair Blank and Commissioner Plant agreed was in the right ballpark. However, you agreed to bring this question back to this deliberation to review in the context of the overall budget. In most cases, advisors have scaled the O&M costs for each portfolio in proportion to the reduction in capital spending in the revised budget, but there are 3 exceptions. 2 of them are the managed charging programs where the incentives provided in the Optimize Your Charge and Charging Perks programs, those are included in the O&M budgets. So I didn't change those. Well, actually, I didn't change the Optimize Your Charge budget because the incentive there is staying the same. But one of your decisions last deliberation was to triple the incentive for the Charging Perks program to make that program more attractive. So I tripled the budget for that program. So those 2. That's how I treated the O&M for those 2. And then I zeroed out the infrastructure maintenance budget as we discussed earlier. But with the exception of those 3, the budget the estimate that you have in front of you just scales the O&M by the capital spending for each portfolio. So the decision point is whether with those exceptions, scaling O&M proportionately to the capital budget of each portfolio is appropriate, or whether you want to set a maximum for O&M as a percentage of each portfolio budget or use some other method.
So a compound decision point here, Commissioner Plan, whether you want to follow advisors' approach or you want to do something different. And if you want to do something different, maybe we'll break out the compound nature.
Yeah, I think since we've already scaled down the O&M for each program, doing something else maybe is duplicative, but I don't know if we want to put like maybe a cap of a certain percentage. But I think just using the scaled O&M probably will accomplish the same thing.
Commissioner Gilman?
I am good with the advisor's approach here, in terms of those couple of exceptions and then scaling the remainder to match, the change in capital budgets.
As am I. Will that work for you, Commissioner Plan, or?
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. The only concern is that, if they don't get, the programs don't deploy at the level that we sort of budget them to, which is what happened in the last TEP, their O&M is pretty high. That's the only reason I was gonna say you could have a percentage, but I think it's fine just to go with the scale.
So maybe we can do it as you propose, but put some language in the order that says if they underspend or even overspend, if we want to do a budget flexibility thing, that we'd expect the O&M to scale accordingly, something like that.
Yeah.
That work for you, Commissioner Gilman?
Or to not scale disproportionately.
Yeah, all right, fine.
Sure.
All right,
It doesn't
fine.
have to keep going
Go
up
with the double
bigger,
negative.
but it should not outpace the growth in the O&M should not outpace the growth in the capital, I think is our concern there. They are not obligated to continue spending at the same percentage O&M.
Okay, very good. And Mr. Mendelson will be discussing a budget flexibility with you in just a few minutes.
All right.
All right. The settlement budget also includes $34.5 million line item for capitalized IT investments. The revised budget scales this down to $19.8 million in proportion to the reduction in overall capital budget. And so the decision point is so that was and when I say revised budget, the budget that I sent you. So the method used in the budget estimate that I sent to you just scales the IT budget accordingly with the overall capital budget. And so the decision point here is whether you want to accept that methodology as proposed or scale IT investment by another method.
Commissioner Plant?
I'd accept the proposed scalar.
Commissioner Gilman?
I also accept the proposal. I was a little troubled by this one, it just in the proceeding in general due to the lack of specificity about what this was going for. And like I understand some of these solutions get developed a little later, but I was really scratching my head figuring out where we're going to spend $34 million on software. And it seems hard to believe that as you scale the programs that large, it has to scale that large. So I'm okay with scaling it back as you recommend. I'd also love to see, in reporting on the TEP, like actually understand what this portion of the budget gets spent on. Of course, it's logical they need some IT solutions and software solutions. These are just really huge numbers, and I think we'd really benefit from some reporting to help us understand what the actual solutions being gained through this budget are, and really how much of this budget they need or are fulfilling, because I'm pretty unclear about that. So I would suggest we request that to be part of the reporting.
I would be good adding that language to the order, requesting additional detail and clarification along with a lower budget. Commissioner Plant?
I agree.
Mr. Greenberg?
All right. The next decision regards the overall budget for the 2024 through 2026 TEP. Advisors estimate that with the adjustments the commission has adopted, and I haven't updated these numbers today, but I don't think there are any huge changes that you've discussed today. So the total budget as it stands right now is right around $267 million. So the question here is whether you are comfortable with that level of spending or want to make further adjustments to any of the budget items.
So I don't think we fully appreciated this in our last deliberation, but we've found almost the exact middle ground between the settlement agreement and the stipulation. Is that a fair characterization, Mr. Greenberg, of where we've landed?
I would say so, yes.
So
It's a math miracle.
Maybe in half approach. Commissioner Plant, any thoughts on budget flexibility? I'm probably close to the 25%, 20%. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think we could allow them 25% flexibility. I don't know if we want to. I guess that would be across the entire thing, or do we have like between programs? Or I mean,
I guess
I just want to clarify our plan was for Mr. Mendelson to work with you on the budget flexibility question. Here, I was just really asking
approval of the budget.
whether there are any specific budget, line items that you feel need to be adjusted if you're comfortable with the overall level of the budget.
Why don't we come back to that after the flexibility discussion? I think that would be I think that would be a useful piece before we opine on the final budget.
Okay.
Mr. Mendelson.
Very good.
Hello, Commissioners. Mike Mendelson of your advisory staff. So yes, the settlement called for a 25% budget flexibility overall and a 50% flexibility value between portfolios. This was consistent with the company's original proposition. The stipulation did not refer to a budget flexibility and sought only a hard cap of $108 million. Separately, staff specifically suggested a 0% budget flexibility. So, yeah, the decision point before you now is what overall budget flexibility would you like to grant the company, and what budget flexibility between portfolios would you grant?
So you've already heard from me and Commissioner Plant a little bit. Why don't you jump in, Commissioner Gilman, and we'll take it after hearing your thinking.
Yeah, I have a question, Mr. Mendelson. I don't know if you know the answer, and apologies, we've been in hearing all week, so I couldn't ask you yet. When you look at budget flexibility between portfolios, you're talking residential, commercial, like the high line, in terms of what is a portfolio?
They use that word portfolio and not program. So yeah, that's my interpretation of that.
Okay, so we've got like clean vehicles, pecan, residential, commercial. Am I thinking of this right in terms of what would be a portfolio?
Residential, commercial, clean vehicles, pecan, I believe is a separate portfolio item. Yes.
Right. So I'm just trying to think through how this works, because like, let's say the commercial budget, it's not as much larger anymore, but it's 2 to 3 times larger than most of the other budgets. So I'm trying to figure out what that, let's say we go to 25% budget flexibility or something, right? What does that mean to like 60,000 can move out of commercial, but much less can move out of the others? Is that the amount that can move out? Is that the amount that can move in? Just given that the portfolios are of such different scale, I'm torturing my brain to figure out how it applies as you move from something very big to something a lot smaller. Am I thinking it too much? about this?
Yeah, I don't have the answer. I think it's a good question, but I don't
Yeah.
know.
Even if he did have the answer, it's not clear what the party's intent was.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I
yeah,
guess to
geez.
me, it broadly means like any given portfolio shouldn't be out of 25% of its range for money that moves to or fro. Which I think I can live with. It's a little vague, but I think I'm okay with that. So probably the caveat I would add is any budgets earmarked for IQ spending specifically should stay and should not be subject to flexibility. You know, whatever those were should remain for that purpose. So I'd just exclude those. Now I'm making it worse, but sorry.
Well, we could also do a bigger number on the IQ programs, 50% on the upside, I guess.
Right. I think you can move money into IQ. You can't move money out of IQ as far as I'm concerned. I think 50% flexibility is too big. It completely obscures to me what we think the budget is and what it's going for. I think 20 to 25% I can live with on the flexibility from different portfolios would more resemble what we think we're getting. And then yeah, I mean, given the lower budget, I'm okay with 20 or 25% total budget flexibility as well. I want to make sure we can meet the moment, you know, if there are needs for the money to get deployed, if there's demand for more rebates, if there's demand for this, you know, within reason, I want to be able to meet the demand with the programs. So those are some thoughts.
So Commissioner Gilman,
Yeah.
I think what I'm understanding is that the 25% is a limit in and out. So if you had $100 million budget in one portfolio and you had a $50 million budget in the other portfolio, you couldn't take 25 million and add it to the 50 million because that'd be a 50% increase. You could take 25 million out of the 100 million, but you can't put it all, you can't exceed 25% more in a specific budget. Is that kind of?
That's how I'm thinking of it. I mean, it's really hard to figure out how it applies in a situation like this with such different budgets, especially when the commercial budget, say, is so much higher than the others. So like if you saw way more demand in commercial, you probably have the leeway to increase the commercial budget 25%, but it can't come from only one program because those numbers are too small.
Right.
So which I think makes sense. You can't just pillage one program, right, to supplement the other. I think it would have to be crowdsourced from around where they have extra, and none of those change by more than 25% to add up to what would be 20%, 25% in the much larger budget. To me, that feels reasonable. I'm sure we'll hear. Ms. Dennis.
Lawyers are coming on.
We're in
Here we
trouble.
go.
Maybe I'm overthinking it already. I'm just tortured by like what it means and how you apply it.
I think that was the worst outcome I've ever gotten, Chair. But thanks for that. I just have two pieces of information to add to the extent it's helpful.
We think we're getting taken out to the woodshed.
I have no legal
It was
advice.
all Commissioner Gilman's fault.
Two things to note from the settlement agreement in case it's helpful to the discussion is that the settlement proposal within the portfolio level flexibility is to transition also from an annual flexibility mechanism to a plan level flexibility mechanism. So I think that should be part of your discussion as well if you want this within yearly budgets or the overall budget. And then to the IQ discussion that Commissioner Gilman brought up, there is a settlement term that says dollars allocated towards the open innovation projects and IQ and DI community outreach and engagement plan, which I think is in advisory services, stays within those budget categories regardless of the flexibility. So just adding that to the discussion, and no one's in trouble.
And with my apologies and for the foreboding and with appreciation for the constructive addition to the conversation, I like how Commissioner Plant has adapted your proposal on the 25% in and out. I guess Commissioner Gilman, you okay with doing it over the plan instead of annual, or would you like to restrict it to annual?
I'm okay with doing it over the plan. I mean, I think are we at 25%?
I think
I mean, I
Commissioner
think,
Plant was at 25%.
With your.
Do you have a preference
with
between
your-
the 20 and the 25%, Commissioner Gilman?
I had suggested 25%. Sorry, did he say a different number?
That's good.
No, he was at 25. All right.
Okay.
So 20
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay with over the whole plan. I think like this is a pretty quickly changing dynamic situation that provides some more flexibility. And I would adopt the settlement provision simpler than the way I said it, probably with regard to the IQ. Although we would note you can put more money in those if the demand is high.
The anti-pillaging proposal from Commissioner Gilman, I approve.
Yeah.
modified by Commissioner Plant, or clarified, at least for me. Does that give you what you need, Mr. Mendelson, on that?
If you could just repeat Commissioner Plant's clarification.
Right.
He just said 25% in and out by portfolio.
Basically, it's like each portfolio has a 25% band above and below that would be acceptable to end up at, and then now we'll talk about overall budget flexibility too, correct?
The idea being, Mr. Mendelson, that you can't take 25% of a much larger budget and put it into a much smaller budget, because that would be more than 25% increase.
Understood. Okay. So would the commission like to come back now to the overall budget as Mr. Greenberg? Presented?
Yeah, I think I think I'm okay with the 267, and I thought might be closer to staff UCA and Affordability Coalition when we started doing this, but I think we found a nice middle ground, so I'm pretty comfortable where we're landing, but see what you think, Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, I agree.
Commissioner Gilman.
Yeah, I think it's reasonable where we've ended up. I would just suggest one thing that's a little different, maybe than what Mr. Greenberg had provided. On the commercial EVSI, I was assuming we just round up to 100 million because there's some difference in the 30% versus 50% rebate. And so I've got us at like 270 million, but very close to where we were. I think it's reasonable, and I think more importantly, it's based on the reasonable kind of components that we already arrived upon, and I think it's helpful that it gets to a point between the two proposals we saw, but the parts and pieces to get there, I think are very reasonable. So I'd support that as the overall budget, and then we'll still talk about flexibility to the overall budget as well, I think.
I think we're resolving that at 25%.
Okay.
But
5% intra-program, a portfolio, and 25% total budget.
yeah, unless you were advocating for 20%.
I'm okay with 25.
Commissioner Plant, you all right with a 25%, and Commissioner Gilman's change to increase the EVSI from what advisor showed a little under 98 million to 100 million.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I guess I just want to say appreciate really the parties, advisors, council working this through with us. I think we've struck a nice balance, on affordability, accountability, but still using the regulated utility monopoly structure to drive EV growth in Colorado in a fairly sensible and reasonable way, as Commissioner Gilman said. So pretty happy where we landed. So, Mr. Mendelson, Mr. Greenberg, sounds like we got one or two cleanup items.
That's right. Just second to last one is the cost benefit analysis, if that's required. Staff had argued that EV related consumption should be based specifically on what is reasonably attributable to public services investment, and note that the TEP program is only the most recent of many federal and state offerings. They also suggested that the company left damaging information out of the record. Advisors believe the commission generally agreed that program attribution should be measured, but want to get a definitive vote here, as well as any guidance you might have regarding that evaluation and cost effectiveness analysis. So the question is, do you want to provide any guidance?
Yeah, I'd like to make a fairly strong request that the company do significantly more cost benefit analysis, free ridership analysis, and really help us understand the impact of their program, versus what's happening anyway. I just feel like we're in the earliest stages of this transition. And the more we understand, the more we learn, and the more sensibly we can invest customer money consistent with statute, the better. So I feel pretty strongly, and I think the DSM area gives us a pretty clear guidance on the metrics that we need to use. So I don't know, Commissioner Plant, would you say that any different?
Yeah, I think it would be good to try and understand sort of where the utility investment is driving activity and where it's having an impact. The one concern I have about using an analogy of the DSM is that uses an MTRC, and obviously a vehicle is a lot of money. If you're counting the entire value of a vehicle against what the limited utility value, I mean, people don't buy a car to help the grid. They want to try and get around. So I don't know if TRC is the right metric, but to analyze to what extent our utility incentives are driving incremental uptake, both on the EBSI side and EVSE side and the vehicle side, I think would be a valuable metric to try and arrive at.
So let me just jump in for a second. Yeah, the analogy wasn't to somehow suggest that we strictly adhere to what we do on the DSM in terms of the application of the individual tests. It's more an analogy to help clarify the type of information we're looking for and the type of data we'd like to see collected, but applied to a significantly different area in a sensible and adaptable way. So I don't know, Commissioner Goodman, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it seems reasonable certainly to request additional information for the next TEP, to the extent like cost benefit analysis, this maybe isn't specifically called out. We are tasked with maximizing the benefits and minimizing the costs, which sounds a whole like to me like having a cost benefit analysis or some sort of cost effectiveness. So, I think one of the things that was really challenging here was a real lack of information. First of all, about how beneficial the programs are to the grid in total, but also how to even prioritize among different programs and different expenditures and how to scale them. All of that could be a lot easier if we had different cost effectiveness information, not different, any cost effectiveness information upon which to help make these decisions. So I think it will help the proceeding considerably. I think it will help the company considerably to try to communicate their priorities and their objectives in the program if we had significantly more information along those lines. So I'm very supportive of the request.
And Mr. Chairman, if I might be able to add, one other idea is I would love to learn from the company how the benefits maybe accrue, with an increase in scale. I mean, you can get a benefit from, 1, 2, 3, 5 vehicles, that you can manage the charging on. But how does that scale as you aggregate more? And are they able to take advantage of, aggregate value on the feeder level? Are they able to take advantage of the aggregate value, more on a peak system level? Or how is that actually playing out in real life? I think that would be important information to get in the next TEP.
Yeah, I'd love to know that. If we can manage charging, can we reduce curtailment of renewables on the bulk power system? If we get VTG, can we avoid, distribution investment? Commissioner Gilman, you have any concerns or additions to Commissioner Plant's requested language?
It's an area I'm repeatedly very interested in seeing us optimize. So I'm there. You got me.
he had you on optimized.
I just one question. I just wanted to confirm that Commissioner Plant, you're referring specifically to managed charging in that request.
Yeah, I mean, managed charging is obviously the method that they're using here to have grid benefit from the EVs. But I'm interested in knowing how that scales and how the benefit scales. If it's if it's a linear benefit, if building upon existing, because one of the questions that we had in this proceeding was are the benefits and the costs limited to an evaluation of that specific period. And one of the things that we're talking about, and one of the things that I suspect is that the benefits accrue over time. And maybe we build this many EVs and managed charging capability through one TEP, and then we build it more in another TEP. But I think the argument was that we should be measuring just the costs against the benefits in that one TEP. But what I'm interested in finding out is, do we have an accrual of benefit? Like, are the benefits in that one TEP increased because of the investments in the other TEP? And so, having this separated period of evaluation, does it make sense? And is there some sort of an accrual value over time? That's one of the things I'm interested in getting at in that examination.
Well, and I'd add on to it. I mean, when I was talking to Mr. Hiley, we walked through a very extreme example where if you have 1 million cars on the road and they all charged at once, it could be 50% greater than coincident peak demand. So this could be, one of the single biggest factors affecting load forecasting. It could be one of the single biggest factors impacting distribution system investment, and it could influence how we build, new combustion turbines versus avoiding the need for new turbines and T&D. So I think it's a broader request than just managed charging. It's how this transition affects various pieces of their business, from distribution system planning to load forecasting to the bulk power system needs, is the way I'd say it. So Commissioner Gilman, would you want to add anything to that?
Sorry, I'm still thinking.
In a way that optimizes everything.
Hey, I mean, as we look across, especially different types of beneficial electrification, the devil's in the details. It's generally the answer, right? Like, this is the same exact tool could be a benefit or a detriment depending how it's used, how we can manage it, what we can do. So it does strike me, you know, if we get, presuming we get cost effectiveness and kind of better metrics and abilities to predict, first of all, it would be helpful if those must show what the assumptions are in the behavior, right? Like that is a really crucial part of this in terms of, are there benefits or detriments to the grid by how this beneficial electrification is being used or being charged? And I think that's also important for us to link through and be sure we're coming through with kind of the policies and support to get the behavior that we have modeled or that we think or expect would happen. To that extent, there might be a variety of behavior that should be modeled so that we can understand the delta, how important, right? So like in this proceeding, we all decided the charging perks is very important. It's clearly the optimized solution for how you try to get interactive charging on the grid, and let's train people properly from the start in the program we want, in the program that's more dynamic and helpful. But we don't have like a delta of like, well, how cost effective would a program be with or without, you know, this help in the charging? So it's just so much of that information is still missing, and we'd really benefit from understanding the value, not just of the programs themselves, but then these really critical pieces that make all the difference as far as how are we getting people to charge at the right time.
Well, Mr. Mendelson, I think this is going to be a TBC decision. So does that give you enough to at least take a shot at a first draft, and we'll take it from there in the TBC process?
Yes, sir. Yep. So the final remaining issue is the approval of remaining issues. Advisors recommend the commission approve remaining items in the settlement agreement that were not specifically voted on by the commission. And that way the commission can rely on many of the nuances of the settlement, if not specifically discussed at deliberation.
Commissioner Plant?
I agree with the recommendation.
Commissioner Gilman?
I agree.
As do I. And I think this will be a TBC order, Mr. Mendelson.
Yes, of course. And we're working on that right now, so hope to have that for you shortly. Great, thank you very much.
Thanks again to all the parties, staff, council, advisors for getting us through this. Mr. Davis, take 3, proceeding number 22A-0315 EJ.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great.
We can't see you,
but you can hear me. Well,
we can.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a victim of the Office of Information Technology today. So thanks for your patience. I'm joined by actually Paul Gomez this morning in case you have some legal questions. On February 15th, Iconergy filed a motion for clarification. Some background is necessary to understand the relief Iconergy is asking for, so please be patient. Iconergy intervened in Public Service Company of Colorado's 2023 Demand-Side Management and Beneficial Electrification Plan proceeding, and it raised 3 main concerns about certain DSM programs. First, that Public Service was inappropriately using ratepayer money to provide free or discounted DSM services to its customers in what Iconergy describes as an unregulated market. Second, that the programs are suboptimal because they are limited to too few implementers. And third, that Public Service does not open these programs to other potential implementers on a regular basis in a transparent fashion. So Iconergy suggested several process changes to increase competition for DSM services. And notably, Iconergy did not join the settlement agreement that was reached by all of the other parties in the proceeding. In response to Iconergy's positions in the case, Public Service maintained that the settlement adequately addressed those process concerns. Public Service pointed out that the company had committed in the settlement to communicate RFPs during its DSM quarterly roundtables, to post information about upcoming RFPs on its website, as well as providing links with the relevant information about participating in those RFPs, and notifying interested parties of RFPs through its DSM distribution email list. Public Service stated that it further agreed to identify the specific criteria on which participants would be evaluated for each RFP. In its testimony, the company opposed opening all of its programs to all interested vendors, explaining that limiting the number of trade partners allowed to submit rebates ensured that only reputable vendors provided services, and it reduced the amount of needed administrative resources to manage the vendors and evaluate their work. Public Service also asserted that it was important for it to retain flexibility to balance the demands in conducting the RFPs and managing the vendors against the costs and demands placed on its internal teams in order to maximize value to all customers, including non-participants. As you recall, the Commission approved the settlement without modification. And in responding to Iconergy's concerns, the Commission issued certain directives to Public Service that were designed to increase competition for DSM services. The Commission concluded, on one hand, that it was persuaded that improvements could be made as to how certain DSM programs are delivered to ensure that qualified vendors can participate without what the Commission called artificial barriers. And on the other hand, the Commission was mindful that it is Public Service who is ultimately responsible for delivering DSM programs, and that some guardrails around the process were warranted. In the motion before you this morning, Iconergy states the Public Service had determined that Iconergy was not qualified to participate in the company's Strategic Energy Management, or SEM program, in its latest RFP. Iconergy maintains it should be qualified to participate, having provided those same services to customers outside of Colorado and to some customers in Colorado willing to forego rebates by choosing Iconergy. Iconergy states it seeks to appeal to the company's determination and to that end request clarification to the Commission's directive in paragraph 78 of decision number C23-381 for Public Service to, quote, afford bidders a mechanism to appeal the company's determination as to their qualifications to the Commission or its staff. Iconergy states in its motion that it's not clear what this contemplated appeal process entails. Iconergy states it understands the Commission did not desire a litigated process, such as a formal complaint proceeding, and that while such a proceeding would provide impartiality and rigor, such a process would be time-consuming, and it probably would not allow Iconergy to participate in programs now and receive rebates for its clients in a timely fashion. On February 26th, the company filed a response to the motion. The company states that it stands by its decision not to accept Iconergy as a vendor for its SEM program. However, Public Service agrees with Iconergy that certain clarifications could be helpful. As to vendor selection, Public Service states its decision not to accept Iconergy was made based on a fair review and evaluation of the vendor proposals received to its RFP. Public Service states it received 8 bids to participate in the SEM. Public Service states it denied 6 of the bids and awarded bids to 2 separate entities. Public Service reports of the 2 awarded bids, 1 entity was awarded the right to support commercial SEM services, and the second entity was awarded the right to support industrial SEM services. Most notably, Public Service states, quote, the company does not currently allow more than 1 vendor in SEM to support the designated customer class of commercial or industrial, which is largely driven by the reasons identified in the company's rebuttal testimony. Public Service states it denied the 6 bids largely based on the fact that it received more competitive bids from the winning bidders. Public Service goes on to say that it agrees with Iconergy that clarification of paragraph 78 of that decision would be helpful, and it offers 2 potential frameworks. The first is the Commission's already established formal complaint process, and the second which Public Service states that it would be conceptually open to, is some sort of appeal process that involves the Commission staff. But Public Service notes that the issues raised in its response would need to be addressed for this alternative process, such as who is staff, what process should staff use, what timelines apply, what level of confidentiality applies, and would the staff determination be binding? So the specific relief sought by Iconergy in the motion before you this morning is clarification regarding the directive in paragraph 78 of that decision for Public Service to afford bidders a mechanism to appeal the company's determination. So I can offer a couple of recommendations, or I can answer your questions or listen to your discussion and votes.
Yeah, if you could give us a recommendation and then we'll come back with questions, discussion, or a vote, that'd be great.
Okay. So advisors and counsel recommend that the Commission grant the motion in part and deny it in part. There are two components to this recommendation, and I'll present them both, but they can be discussed separately, and they don't really rely on one another in terms of your votes. First, we suggest that the Commission clarify that Iconergy should use the existing complaint process for resolution of this particular dispute. Iconergy could ask for expedited treatment. This existing process is set forth in the Commission's rules. We make this recommendations because what we see as the directive to the Commission in paragraph 78 is really an optimistic request that the company strive to work into its bidding process some sort of mechanism for a denied bidder to appeal to the Commission in some capacity. But that did not happen, and Public Service did not build into its process actively such an appeal process. So once Iconergy has received its bad news about the RFP, rather than collaborate with Public Service to come up with a process, Iconergy has come directly to the Commission. In this circumstance, there's just no appeal process at the Commission other than the formal complaint process, and we cannot devise an alternative process that would be better than simply using the existing process. Second, Iconergy's motion is revealed.
Mr. Davis, can I just ask you a question
Sure.
on that before you go on to the second piece? Can that complaint process be sort of a notice and comment thing? It doesn't necessarily have to have a formal hearing, right?
Well, I think that is in large part up to the how the presiding officer determines it's appropriate to hear the matter. Public Service states that there are some disputed facts here, so an evidentiary hearing may be required. But I'll also turn this over to Mr. Gomez for his opinion here.
Good morning. I was hoping to just be able to listen, but yes, Mr. Davis is correct. With the complaint process, we have a formal complaint process, which is you're all well aware of what that process entails. And the hearing officer can also, pursuant to statute, have modified procedures. But whatever procedure is chosen, it would have to afford all parties due process, right to, especially in a complaint, certainly the respondent has the right to respond to the complaint and offer testimony. And in this case, as Mr. Davis mentions, if there's truly a conflict with regard to factual issues, then a more formalized complaint process would be appropriate.
Thanks to both of you. Would you like to jump to the second piece of your recommendation, Mr. Davis?
Sure. Second, Iconergy's motion has revealed an issue that troubles us. As I mentioned earlier, Public Service stated in its response that it still does not allow more than one vendor in the SEM program to support the designated customer classes of commercial or industrial. Our sense is that the Commission rejected the company's practice of sole sourcing the SEM, particularly in paragraph 80 of the decision. There, the Commission directed Public Service to issue an RFP prior to the filing of any application for approval of a multi-year DSM or BE plan that would increase the role of third-party partnerships in implementing its business program. The Commission emphasized that the intent of this requirement is to substantially expand the number of third parties eligible to provide rebate-eligible upstream services, such as engineering and energy modeling. And the Commission later emphasized the same point in its decision on RRR. We think the practice of not allowing more than one vendor in an SEM is an example of an artificial barrier that the Commission sought to eliminate as an improvement to its DSM program delivery based on Iconergy's advocacy in this case. Accordingly, if the Commission shares these concerns, we recommend that the Commission discuss whether it appears that Public Service is potentially not complying with the Commission's requirement on Public Service to expand the number of third parties eligible to provide DSM services for commercial entities, such that the Commission should direct trial staff to bring to a future weekly meeting either a show cause or a presentation why no show cause is needed. And this would be regarding the company's continuing practice to sole source the SEM program.
Commissioner Plant, thoughts on the complaint case approach or the staff show cause, no show cause recommendation?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with both recommendations. I'd note, I think that, the last issue that Mr. Davis brought up is one that's really disturbing, because I think that we were pretty clear that we did not want this to be a sole source project. And Iconergy was also very clear when they were testifying that, there were other, providers that agreed with them, but they didn't want to, sort of jaundice their chances of getting selected by coming out publicly, and that they had just said, somebody has to talk about this. And so they came out and let us know about this the process and some of the problems with the process. And it turns out, yeah, they were rejected, and we went back to one provider. And it's just, it's clearly there's something wrong with the company's process. I think that, an argument that there is only one qualified provider of these services is, on its face, just illogical. And for them to be choosing one is in direct conflict with what we've indicated that we want them to do. So I'd agree. I think our options at this point are a little bit limited, but I agree with the recommendations from Mr. Davis.
So Commissioner Goman, not only the recommendations from Mr. Davis, but Commissioner Plant's request to put language in the order about our concern about the company's practices, and suggesting that on its face it appears like they've disregarded our prior order.
Yeah, I agree with all of it. I mean, we heard what they had to say in rebuttal, and I think this action really largely misses the point what they were told to do. Not only is there, a potential fairness issue here, but we want to ensure these services are deployed largely to the customer base, and artificially restricting it it didn't seem to me in the proceeding to make any sense. It still doesn't seem to make any sense. So I agree with the recommendation, as well as Commissioner Plant adding some language in there to express our frustration with not seeing any movement and how this is being deployed, despite, I think, pretty clear direction to do so.
And Commissioner Plant, would you be okay with this as an ABC order, or would you like to see it before it goes out?
I think an ABC order is fine. I think that we've been pretty clear on what we want here.
All evidence to the contrary.
Yeah, so I think an ABC order is fine.
Mr. Davis, does that give you what you need?
Yes, it does. Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you. And I think that concludes our agenda. Any final comments, Commissioner Plant, other than thanking the both of you for giving me some space in that CHP hearing to deal with some personal issues. So any final thoughts, Commissioner Plant?
No, our thoughts are with you out there in Pennsylvania, and sorry you're having to go through that right now, but we're moving ahead with the hearing, and Commissioner Gilman's doing a fine job, even without a gavel.
Virtual gavel. Commissioner Gilman, thanks again for leading that forward. Any final thoughts before we adjourn?
I think that's it. We'll see everybody back at 1 o'clock in the hearing.
Thanks all. We're adjourned.